Silence is one of the most misunderstood tools in human behavior. Most people think respect comes from speaking well, speaking often, or proving their intelligence through constant communication. But psychology reveals something far more powerful. People don't respect the person who talks the most. They respect the person who controls when and how they speak. Silence, when used with intention, creates presence. It signals confidence, self-control, and awareness, all of which the human mind instinctively associates with authority. When someone fills every moment with words, they unknowingly lower their perceived value. The brain starts to filter them out. It becomes noise, predictable, constant, and easy to ignore. But when someone speaks selectively, something shifts. The brain pays attention. It leans in because uncertainty creates focus. When people are not sure what you'll say next or when you'll say it, they subconsciously assign more importance to your words. This is rooted in a psychological principle known as scarcity. The less available something is, the more valuable it appears. Silence works the same way. If your words are always available, they lose impact. But if they are measured, intentional, and spaced with pauses, they gain weight. Each sentence begins to carry meaning beyond the surface. People don't just hear you, they interpret you. There's also a deeper layer to this. Silence communicates emotional stability. When someone reacts instantly to everything, it signals impulsiveness. It shows they are controlled by external triggers. But when someone pauses, thinks, and then responds, it signals mastery. It tells others that this person is not easily shaken, not easily influenced, and not desperate to be heard. And that alone commands respect without saying a single word. In conversations, silence becomes a form of control, not control over others, but control over the pace, the energy, and the direction of interaction. When you are comfortable with silence, you are not rushing to fill gaps. You are allowing space. And in that space, other people reveal more about themselves. They speak longer. They expose their thoughts. They try to fill the quiet, and in doing so, they often give away more information than they intended. This creates a subtle power dynamic. The person who is comfortable in silence becomes the observer. The one who talks excessively becomes the one being observed. And psychologically, the observer is almost always perceived as more composed, more intelligent, and more in control. Silence also protects you from unnecessary mistakes. The more you speak, the higher the chances of saying something that weakens your position. Over-explaining, justifying, or rambling often comes from a need for approval, and that need is visible. People can sense it. But when you speak less, you eliminate that exposure. You present only what is necessary, nothing more, nothing less. That precision builds credibility. There's a specific moment in conversation where silence becomes even more powerful. After you've made a point, most people make a statement and then immediately start explaining it further, trying to make sure it's understood or accepted. But in doing so, they dilute their own message. They turn something strong into something uncertain. When you make a point and then remain silent, you force others to process it. You give your words time to settle. And that pause adds weight to what you just said. Silence can also be used to handle conflict with strength. When someone challenges you, insults you, or tries to provoke a reaction, the natural instinct is to respond immediately, to defend, to argue, to prove. But reacting instantly often lowers your position. It shows emotional investment in the conflict. It shows that the other person has the ability to influence your state. When you pause instead, when you hold silence for a moment, you disrupt their expectation. You take control of the interaction. You show that you are not easily triggered, and often that alone diffuses the situation because many people rely on reactions. When they don't get one, they lose momentum. Another important aspect is how silence affects perception in group settings. In a room full of people, the loudest voices are often heard, but not always respected. The person who speaks occasionally, but with clarity and timing, stands out more. Their words are remembered because they are not lost in a flood of conversation. They become the voice people wait for. This doesn't mean avoiding communication or becoming distant. It means being intentional. It means understanding that every word you speak should have purpose. It should move the conversation forward, add value, or establish your position. Anything beyond that is unnecessary. Silence also forces you to become a better listener. And listening is one of the most underrated forms of influence. When people feel heard, they feel respected. And when they feel respected, they are more likely to respect you in return. But real listening requires silence, not just the absence of speaking, but the presence of attention. There's also an internal shift that happens when you embrace silence. You become less dependent on external validation. You stop feeling the need to prove yourself through words. You become comfortable with your own presence, and that comfort translates outward. People can sense when someone is at ease with themselves. It creates a calm, grounded energy that naturally draws respect. Over time, silence becomes part of your identity. People begin to associate you with thoughtfulness, control, and depth. They don't expect impulsive reactions or unnecessary noise. They expect precision, and that expectation alone elevates your presence. The key is not to use silence as a tactic in isolated moments, but to integrate it into the way you operate, to understand that not every situation requires a response, not every opinion needs to be shared, and not every gap needs to be filled. When you remove the urge to constantly speak, you create space for something more powerful, intentional communication. And in that space, your words stop being ordinary and start becoming influential. Boundaries are one of the clearest psychological signals of self-worth. Yet most people misunderstand them completely. They assume boundaries are about pushing others away, being difficult, or creating distance. In reality, boundaries are not about others at all. They are about you. They define what you accept, what you reject, and what you are willing to tolerate. And whether you realize it or not, people are constantly studying those signals to determine how to treat you. When you lack boundaries, you send a message that your time, energy, and attention are available without conditions. You become easy to access, easy to influence, and easy to overlook. The human mind does not assign high value to what is always accessible. Just like anything else in life, when something is unlimited and freely given, it loses its perceived importance. This is why people who constantly say yes often feel underappreciated. It's not because they lack value, it's because they are not protecting it. On the other hand, when you establish boundaries, you introduce structure. You make it clear that access to you is earned, not assumed. This instantly changes the dynamic. People begin to think before they ask. They become more aware of how they approach you, not because you demanded respect, but because your behavior made it clear that respect is required. There is a psychological principle at play here called behavioral conditioning. People learn how to treat you based on what you allow. Every time you tolerate something, you reinforce it. Every time you accept disrespect, overcommitment, or imbalance, you are teaching others that this is acceptable behavior around you. And once that pattern is established, it becomes difficult to break. This is why boundaries must be consistent, not emotional, not occasional, consistent. If you set a boundary one day and ignore it the next, you create confusion, and confusion weakens your position. People will test you, not always intentionally, but naturally. They will observe whether your standards hold under pressure. If they see that your boundaries shift depending on the situation, they will adjust their behavior accordingly. But if they see that your boundaries remain firm regardless of circumstances, they begin to accept them as part of who you are. One of the biggest mistakes people make is believing that boundaries require explanation. They feel the need to justify every no, to soften it, to make it more acceptable. But the more you explain, the more you invite negotiation. And when something becomes negotiable, it loses its strength. A boundary delivered with clarity and calmness does not need justification. It is not aggressive. It is not emotional. It is simply stated, and then it is upheld. For example, when you say no to something that doesn't align with your priorities, you are not rejecting the person, you are protecting your focus. But if you hesitate, over-explain, or apologize excessively, it signals uncertainty, and uncertainty invites pressure. People will sense that you are not fully committed to your decision, and they may push further. This is where internal confidence becomes critical. Boundaries are not just external actions, they are internal decisions. You must first believe that your time and energy have value before you can expect others to respect them. If you struggle with this internally, it will show in your behavior. Your boundaries will sound like requests instead of decisions. Another important aspect of boundaries is how they affect your relationships. Many people fear that setting boundaries will push others away, and sometimes it does. But what it actually does is filter your environment. It removes those who benefit from your lack of limits and attracts those who respect your standards. This is not a loss, it is a correction. Healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, not unlimited availability. When both people understand each other's limits, there is balance, there is clarity, there is trust. But when one person constantly overextends while the other takes advantage, whether consciously or unconsciously, the relationship becomes one-sided. Boundaries restore that balance. They also protect your mental and emotional energy. Without boundaries, you become reactive. You respond to every demand, every request, every situation without pause. Over time, this leads to exhaustion, frustration, and even resentment. And that resentment often shows up in subtle ways: tone of voice, body language, lack of enthusiasm. But when you operate with boundaries, you become intentional. You choose where your energy goes. You decide what deserves your attention. And that sense of control creates stability. You are no longer reacting to everything, you are directing your own involvement. There's also a powerful shift in how people perceive you. When you have strong boundaries, you are seen as someone who respects themselves. And that perception changes everything, because people rarely respect someone who does not respect themselves. Respect, at its core, is about alignment. Do your actions match your standards? Do your decisions reflect your values? Boundaries are the bridge between what you believe and how you behave. Without them, there is a gap, and people notice that gap, even if they can't explain it. It's also important to understand that boundaries do not require confrontation. You don't need to argue, raise your voice, or create tension. In fact, the most powerful boundaries are often the quietest. They are expressed through behavior more than words. If someone repeatedly disrespects your time, you don't need to lecture them. You simply stop making yourself available in the same way. If someone crosses a line, you don't need to escalate the situation. You adjust your interaction, you reduce access, you change your response. Over time. People either adapt or distance themselves, and both outcomes serve you. Boundaries also eliminate the need for constant validation. When you know what you stand for, you don't need others to agree with every decision. You don't need approval to maintain your standards. You operate from a place of certainty, not permission. This creates a quiet strength, a presence that doesn't demand attention but commands it. And the more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. You stop seeing boundaries as something you have to do and start seeing them as part of who you are. They become automatic, effortless, integrated into every interaction, because at the end of the day, boundaries are not about controlling others. They are about defining yourself. They are about making it clear through your actions, your decisions, and your consistency that your time, your energy, and your presence are not things to be taken lightly. And once that message is understood, everything around you begins to shift. Emotional discipline is one of the most powerful and least visible traits that command respect. It does not announce itself loudly. It doesn't need attention. But when it's present, people feel it immediately. It shows up in how you respond under pressure, how you carry yourself in uncertainty, and how you handle situations that would normally provoke a reaction. And the reason it earns respect so deeply is simple. Most people don't have it. Human beings are naturally reactive. When something unexpected happens, the brain looks for a quick response. It moves toward defense, justification, or emotional release. This is instinct. It's fast, automatic, and often uncontrolled. But emotional discipline interrupts that process. It creates a gap between what happens and how you respond. And in that gap, you gain power. That power comes from choice. When you are emotionally disciplined, you are not controlled by the moment. You are not pulled in every direction by external triggers. Instead, you observe first, you process, and then you decide how to respond. That decision-making ability is what people recognize as strength, even if they don't consciously understand why. One of the clearest demonstrations of emotional discipline is how someone handles provocation. When a person is criticized, challenged, or disrespected, the natural reaction is to defend themselves immediately, to push back, to prove a point. But this kind of reaction often reveals more about the person's internal state than their external position. It shows that they are affected, that their emotions are easily activated, that they are invested in the approval or perception of others. On the other hand, when someone remains calm in the same situation, it creates a completely different impression. It signals that they are not easily shaken, that their identity is not dependent on the opinions of others, that they have control over themselves. And self-control is one of the strongest indicators of authority. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions or pretending they don't exist. Emotional discipline is not about becoming cold or detached. It's about managing your response, not denying your feelings. You can feel frustration, anger, or disappointment without allowing those emotions to dictate your behavior. That distinction is critical because once emotions begin to control behavior, consistency disappears. Decisions become impulsive, words become reactive, and over time, this unpredictability weakens how others perceive you. People are less likely to trust someone who reacts differently depending on their mood or the situation. But when your responses are steady, measured, and intentional, you become predictable in the best way. You become reliable. Reliability builds trust, and trust builds respect. There is also a neurological aspect to this. When you react emotionally, you are operating from the more primitive part of the brain, often referred to as the limbic system. This is where fight or flight responses originate. It is fast, but not always rational. Emotional discipline allows you to engage the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning, decision-making, and long-term thinking. This shift changes not only how you respond, but how others perceive your intelligence and authority. People may not understand the science behind it, but they recognize the outcome. They see someone who doesn't rush, who doesn't escalate, who doesn't lose control. And that creates a sense of stability around you. In high-pressure environments, this becomes even more important. When situations become uncertain or tense, most people look for cues. They observe others to decide how to react. If you remain calm, you influence the emotional tone of the entire environment. Your composure becomes a reference point. Others begin to mirror it, consciously or unconsciously. This is how emotional discipline extends beyond the individual. It affects the group. It also plays a critical role in communication. When emotions take over, clarity disappears. People speak too quickly, interrupt, or say things they later regret. The message becomes distorted by the delivery. But when you are emotionally disciplined, your communication becomes precise. You choose your words carefully. You listen fully. You respond with intention. This creates a sense of control in conversations, not dominance, but control over the quality of interaction. And that control naturally commands respect. Another important aspect is patience. Emotional discipline allows you to delay reactions, to wait for the right moment instead of responding instantly. This is especially powerful in negotiations, disagreements, or decision making. The person who reacts first often reveals more, while the person who waits gains more information. Patience also signals confidence. It shows that you are not rushed, not pressured, not desperate for immediate resolution. And that absence of urgency places you in a stronger position. There's also a deeper internal benefit. When you develop emotional discipline, you reduce unnecessary stress. You are no longer reacting to every situation as if it requires immediate attention. You begin to differentiate between what matters and what doesn't. This clarity allows you to conserve energy and focus on what truly deserves your response. Over time, this creates a sense of control over your own life. You are not constantly pulled into emotional highs and lows. You operate from a more stable baseline, and that stability becomes part of your identity. People start to associate you with calmness, with clarity, with control. They trust that you won't overreact, that you won't escalate situations unnecessarily, that you can handle pressure without losing direction. And that trust translates directly into respect. It's also worth noting that emotional discipline makes your reactions more impactful when you do choose to express them. If you are always reacting strongly, people become desensitized. But if you are usually calm and measured, any visible shift in your tone or behavior carries more weight. It signals that something is significant. This selective expression increases the effectiveness of your communication. It ensures that your emotions, when displayed, are taken seriously. Developing emotional discipline is not about perfection. It's about awareness and practice. It starts with noticing your reactions, understanding your triggers, and gradually creating space between stimulus and response. That space may be small at first, a few seconds, a pause, a breath, but even that is enough to change the outcome. And as that space grows, so does your control. You begin to respond instead of react, to choose instead of impulse, to lead your emotions instead of being led by them. And in a world where most people are driven by immediate feelings and external pressures, that level of control stands out. It sets you apart in a way that doesn't need to be announced, explained, or proven through words. Walking away is one of the most misunderstood forms of strength to most people. It looks like giving up, losing interest, or avoiding confrontation. But at a psychological level, it signals something far more powerful. It shows that you are not dependent. And independence, especially emotional independence, is one of the strongest drivers of respect. Human behavior is deeply influenced by perceived value, and value, more often than not, is tied to scarcity and choice. When someone feels that you will always stay, always tolerate, always chase, your value decreases in their perception. Not because you lack worth, but because there is no risk of losing you. And when there is no risk, there is no urgency to treat you with care or respect. Walking away changes that dynamic instantly. It introduces consequence. It shows that your presence is not guaranteed, that access to you is conditional, that there are standards attached to being in your space. And when people realize that you are willing to leave situations that don't align with those standards, they begin to take you more seriously. This doesn't require dramatic exits or emotional reactions. In fact, the most powerful form of walking away is quiet and controlled. It is not about proving a point to others. It is about honoring a decision within yourself. When you leave without chaos, without explanation, without needing validation, it sends a message that is far stronger than any argument. It says, I know my value and I act accordingly. At the core of this behavior is detachment, not indifference, but detachment from outcomes that compromise your standards. Most people stay in situations longer than they should because they are attached to approval, to comfort, to familiarity, or to fear of loss. This attachment weakens their position. It makes them tolerate things they normally wouldn't. It makes them negotiate with their own boundaries. But when you are willing to walk away, you remove that leverage. You are no longer controlled by the fear of losing something because you have already accepted that possibility. And once that fear is gone, your decisions become clearer, stronger, and more aligned with who you are. This is where psychological power shifts. In any interaction, the person who needs the outcome less often holds more influence. When you are not desperate for a specific result, whether it's approval, agreement, or continuation, you naturally become more grounded. You are not trying to force anything. You are not overextending. You are simply choosing what aligns and what doesn't. And that level of control is visible. People can sense when someone is trying too hard to hold on. It shows in subtle ways, over-explaining, over-apologizing, overcompensating. These behaviors come from a place of fear, and fear, even when hidden, reduces perceived strength. Walking away removes that signal completely. It replaces it with certainty. It tells others that your decisions are not driven by desperation, but by standards. And standards creates structure. They define what is acceptable and what is not. Without them, interactions become unbalanced. With them, expectations are clear. There is also a psychological effect known as the principle of loss aversion. People tend to value something more when they believe they might lose it. When you are always present, always available, there is no sense of loss attached to your absence. But when you demonstrate that you can leave, that you can withdraw your time, energy, or attention, it activates that sense of potential loss. This doesn't mean using absence as a manipulation tactic. It means genuinely being willing to remove yourself from situations that do not meet your standards. The difference is intention. One is strategic, the other is authentic, and people can feel the difference. Authentic detachment builds respect. Manipulative behavior eventually destroys it. Another important aspect is self-respect. Walking away is not just about how others perceive you, it's about how you perceive yourself. Every time you stay in a situation that goes against your values, you weaken your own sense of identity. You create internal conflict. You tell yourself, even if subconsciously, that your standards are flexible under pressure. But when you walk away, you reinforce your identity. You prove to yourself that your values are not negotiable, that your standards are real. And that internal alignment creates confidence, not loud confidence, but quiet certainty. This certainty is what others respond to, because people are drawn to those who know where they stand. It removes ambiguity. It creates clarity. And clarity is something people respect. even if they don't always agree with it. Walking away also protects your long-term position. In the moment, staying might feel easier. It avoids discomfort. It maintains familiarity. But over time, it often leads to dissatisfaction, imbalance, and loss of respect, both from others and from yourself. Leaving, on the other hand, may create short-term discomfort, but it preserves your standards. It maintains your position. And in the long run, it leads to stronger, more aligned situations. There's also a level of emotional control required to walk away effectively. It's not about reacting in anger or frustration. That kind of exit still gives control to the situation. True walking away happens when you are calm, clear, and deliberate, when your decision is not driven by emotion, but by principle. This makes your action more powerful, because it cannot be dismissed as impulsive. It cannot be reduced to a reaction. It stands as a decision, one that reflects your values. Over time, this behavior shapes how people approach you. They begin to understand that certain lines cannot be crossed, that certain standards will not be lowered, and this understanding influences their behavior before any situation even develops. Respect, in many ways, is preventative. It reduces the likelihood of disrespect occurring in the first place. And walking away is one of the strongest signals that establishes that prevention. It tells people that access to you is a privilege, not an entitlement, that your presence is a choice, not an obligation, and that choice is based on alignment, not convenience. The more consistently you demonstrate this, the more it becomes part of your identity. You are no longer someone who tolerates anything for the sake of keeping things intact. You become someone who chooses carefully, who engages intentionally, and who leaves when necessary. And that reputation builds over time. People begin to recognize that you are not easily swayed, not easily pressured, not easily kept in situations that don't serve you. And because of that, they approach you differently, with more awareness, more consideration, and more respect, because they understand that if those standards are not met, you will not hesitate to remove yourself from the equation. Consistency is the foundation on which respect is built, yet it is the one principle most people underestimate. They focus on moments instead of patterns, on intensity instead of reliability. They try to impress in short bursts, believing that a few strong actions will define how they are perceived. But the human mind doesn't work that way. It doesn't form lasting judgments based on isolated moments. It forms them based on repetition. People are constantly observing patterns, even when they are not aware of it. They notice how you behave over time, how you respond in different situations, how closely your actions align with your words. And from these observations, they form a mental image of who you are. That image becomes your reputation, and your reputation speaks before you ever say a word. When your behavior is inconsistent, that image becomes unclear. One day you are focused, the next day you are distracted. One moment you hold strong boundaries, the next you compromise them. One situation you respond with calm control, the next you react impulsively. This unpredictability creates doubt, and where there is doubt, there is hesitation. People don't fully trust what they can't predict. But when you are consistent, everything changes. Consistency creates stability. It gives people a clear understanding of what to expect from you, not in a limiting way, but in a grounding way. They know how you operate. They know your standards. They know your limits. And because of that clarity, they begin to adjust their behavior around you. This is where respect starts to build, not from what you say, but from what you repeatedly do. There is a psychological principle called cognitive ease. The brain prefers what is familiar and predictable because it requires less effort to process. When someone is consistent, their behavior becomes easy to understand. There is no need to constantly analyze or question their actions. This creates a sense of comfort and trust is a key component of respect. In contrast, inconsistency creates cognitive strain. People are forced to interpret, guess, and adapt to changing behavior. This not only reduces trust, but it also lowers perceived reliability. And reliability is one of the core traits people look for when deciding whether to respect someone. Consistency also reinforces credibility. When your actions match your words over time, people begin to believe you without needing proof. You don't have to convince them. You don't have to explain yourself repeatedly. Your history does the work for you. But when there is a gap between what you say and what you do, that credibility weakens. Even small inconsistencies can create doubt. And once doubt is introduced, it becomes difficult to remove. People start to question your intentions, your discipline, and your authenticity. This is why consistency is not about perfection, it's about alignment. It's about making sure that your actions reflect your values as often as possible, that your decisions follow a clear standard, that your behavior does not shift based on convenience or pressure. One of the most powerful aspects of consistency is that it compounds over time. A single action may go unnoticed, but repeated actions create a pattern, and patterns are what people remember. If you show up prepared once, it's appreciated. If you show up prepared every time, it becomes expected. If you remain calm in one situation, it's noted. If you remain calm consistently, it becomes part of your identity. This is how respect transitions from being situational to being automatic. People no longer evaluate you in each moment. They rely on your pattern. They assume you will act in a certain way because you always have. And that assumption gives you a level of influence that cannot be achieved through occasional effort. Consistency also reduces the need for external validation. When you operate with clear standards and follow them repeatedly, you build internal trust. You know what you are capable of. You know how you respond. You don't need others to confirm your value because your behavior has already established it. This internal confidence is subtle but powerful. It removes hesitation. It removes the need to prove yourself. And that absence of insecurity is something people notice. There is also a discipline behind consistency that people respect, even if they don't articulate it. Staying consistent requires effort. It requires focus. It requires the ability to maintain standards, even when it's inconvenient. Most people struggle with this. They start strong but lose momentum. They act with intention for a short period, then revert to old habits. But when someone maintains consistency over time, it signals a different level of commitment. It shows that they are not driven by temporary motivation, but by structure. And structure creates reliability. Reliability leads to trust, and trust leads to respect. Consistency also acts as a filter for your environment. When people know what to expect from you, they either align with it or move away. This naturally creates a more stable and respectful environment. Those who remain understand your standards and operate within them. Those who don't eventually remove themselves. This process is not forced. It happens organically. Another important aspect is how consistency affects decision making. When your standards are clear and consistently applied, decisions become easier. You don't need to evaluate every situation from scratch. You rely on your established principles. This reduces hesitation and increases clarity, and clarity is something people respect because clarity eliminates confusion. It shows that you are not easily swayed, not easily influenced, not easily redirected. You know what you stand for, and your actions reflect that consistently. It's also important to recognize that consistency is tested during difficult moments. It's easy to maintain standards when everything is going well, but real consistency shows when there is pressure, distraction, or challenge. When you maintain your behavior, even in those situations, it strengthens your reputation significantly. People notice when someone stays the same under pressure. It signals integrity. It shows that their behavior is not situational, but foundational. Over time, this builds a level of respect that doesn't need to be reinforced constantly. It becomes part of how you are perceived at a deeper level. People don't question it, they accept it. And once that level is reached, your presence carries weight before you even engage. Your reputation enters the room before you do. Your actions are anticipated. Your standards are understood. At that point, respect is no longer something that needs to be earned repeatedly. It is something that is maintained through continued alignment, because consistency is not a one-time effort. It is a continuous process, a daily commitment to operate in a way that reflects your values, your standards, and your identity. And the longer you maintain that commitment, the stronger your position becomes, until eventually your behavior speaks so clearly and so consistently that your words become secondary to the pattern you've already established.